Good morning, everyone. There's two people with different heights in this thing. I'm like, why is it so low? A couple of announcements before we begin. An acknowledgement, really, memorials. Barbara Creek, some of you know, and Barbara Woody both passed away this month. Longtime members, beloved friends of this community. We'll have more information about memorial services coming up as we learn more from the families. Immediately after this service, we're going to have something called Trunk or Treat in the parking lot. Two parts of that. Hopefully you brought some candy to participate, and a costume. There will be costumes imposed. I have candy for the kids, and for horror, I have committee assignments for the adults. Watch out. Also, if you've parked back there and you are a cold dead heart and you're not participating, you have to get out of that parking lot by 12:15 because we're closing the parking lot, and you will be locked in until 1:30. Boom. So, if you want to get out, you got to do it after, pretty quick. Auction tickets will be on sale in Elliott Hall after the services. We've sort of set a very ambitious auction goal for ourselves, and so you can help us reach that doing a couple of things. You can be a sponsor. You can come to the auction and bid on things. To do that, you need to buy a ticket, both for the online and the in-person events. You can also donate something of value to the thing. I have an amazing vegan dinner that doesn't promise to turn you vegan, but maybe it will. Who knows? It's amazing. So please bid. Hundreds of dollars for my dinner. Hundreds. But you can find out all of that in Elliott Hall. There's somebody out there. Also, Monica and I are bringing committees, teams back. We're really trying to create a larger sense of ownership over the congregation, just in terms of how this place is run and developed. And so about 6 years ago, there was a committee structure that sort of went away, and we're bringing it back. So this, on the first Wednesday of every night, we're doing team meeting night. And in the future, it'll be in person, there'll be pizza, there'll be childcare. But this one is virtual, it'll just be on Zoom, and we're just piloting it with 4 teams: hospitality, pastoral care, buildings and grounds, and social justice. Whew. So if you actually have any interest in any of those teams, being on those teams that will help define what it's like, what those programs are like here, please come talk to Monica or I. Or me? Me. Prize for you. Last announcement. Next week, daylight savings. Your phone will probably change, but just so you know, we want to see you here. Okay. With that, let's begin our worship. A poem by Annie Finch. In the season leaves should love, since it gives them leave to move through the wind toward the ground they were watching while they hung. Legend says there is a seam stitching darkness like a name. Now, when dying grasses veil earth from the sky in one last pale wave, as autumn dies to bring winter back and then the spring, we who die ourselves can peel back another kind of veil. A veil that hangs among us like thick smoke. Tonight, at last, I feel it shake. I feel the nights stretching away, thousands long, behind the days, till they reach the darkness where all of me is ancestor. I move my hand and feel a touch move with me, and when I brush my own mind across another, I am with my mother's mother. Sure as footsteps in my waiting self, I find her, and she brings arms that carry answers for me, intimate and waiting bounty. Carry me. She leaves this trail through a shutter of the veil and leaves like amber, where she stays, a gift for her perpetual gaze. Happy Samhain. Happy Halloween. Now, Carol, who is in the other room, heard this hymn last week. And she came to the 9 o'clock service, and she said, there is no dancing, and we need dancing. So, please dance as we sing our next hymn. Come on, that's not how you dance. I dance like this, come on.
Santry says, to find the origin of Halloween, you have to look to the festival of Samhain in Ireland's Celtic past. Samhain had distinctive elements. It was an important fire festival, celebrated over the evening of October 31st and throughout the following day. The flames of old fires had to be extinguished and ceremonially relit by druids. It was also a festival not unlike modern New Year's Day, in that it carried the notion of casting out the old and moving into the new. To our pagan ancestors, it marked the end of the pastoral cycle, a time when all the crops would have been gathered and placed in storage for the long winter ahead, and when livestock would be brought in from the fields and selected for slaughter and breeding. But it was also the last day of the year, the time when the souls of the departed would return to their former homes, and when potentially malevolent spirits were released from the other world and were made visible to mankind. For Celts, Samhain was a spiritual time, but with a lot of confusion thrown into the mix. Being between years or in transition, the usually fairly stable boundaries between the other world and the human world became less secure. While I don't fear banshees or fairies tonight, I am feeling this in-between time. We are not where we were, but we're also not where we thought we'd be. This is true in so many aspects of our lives: political, pandemic, societal. Over and over, I'm hearing from people who are exhausted, emotionally and physically. When people are exhausted, our emotions come closer to the surface. We are quick to respond in joy, in anger, and in fear. We've collectively spent so long making decisions that we've never even considered before that everything feels a bit wrought. In this time of in-between, our worry and fear are still so very present. During the festival of Samhain, to ward off the evil let loose, huge bonfires were lit, and people wore ugly masks and disguises to confuse the spirits and stop the dead, identifying individuals who they disliked during their own lifetime. What masks are we wearing right now to confuse the spirits or feelings around us? Is it the mask of being fine? That you have everything under control? Is it the mask of anger because you feel shame or guilt as to how something has turned out? Is it the mask of fear because acknowledging your own lack of control in the universe feels worse? What would happen if we let our masks down? If we started being honest with our coworkers and friends and partners about our masks? If we said all the things we're hiding from the spirits around us during this in-between time? Our natural world is finishing its cycle, ready to rest and be reborn in the spring. Just as spells and incantations of witches were especially powerful at Samhain, so the night was believed to be full of portents of the future. As we continue to live in this in-between time of not what was and not what will be, let us remember that the Druids needed to let go of the fires of the past in order to relight them for the future.
I'm fine. That's my mask. I'm fine. In my early 20s, I did a lot of rock climbing. I'd moved to Spain after high school because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I just knew it wasn't college. And rock climbing was pretty much all I did. Bad part about Spain in the early 90s was the high unemployment, about a quarter of the population. The good part was that this meant my friends had a lot of free time. And Spain was so cheap we could camp for days or weeks. And once we even went for a month, which was also the last time I ever rock climbed. Almost. We were camped in this little mountain town outside Valencia called Montanejos. And every morning we rose early, climbed for hours, bathed in the river, ate mountains of pasta. It was a young man's dream. A few days before we were set to leave, 4 of us attempted a long, multi-pitched climb overhanging a dry riverbed. It was the most technical climb I had ever attempted, and I was both nervous and excited. The photos of us from the bottom are so goofy. I don't think I was the only one feeling these emotions. And I'm realizing that my mom is here, and she's never heard this story. So she's about to get a shock. Sorry. We'd been climbing for a few hours, and we were very near the top, maybe 60 or 40 feet. As it turns out, I don't know, because I never finished, because I cut my palm diagonally from index finger to the heel. And the combination of the blood on the rock and the dry riverbed below sent me into a panic, and I froze, clinging to the wall for life, unable to move. This is a dangerous thing to do when you're attached to a rope with 3 other men and you're maybe 800 or 1,000 feet into the sky. I was 3rd in the line, and when the 4th and final member of our little inchworm caught up to me, he was surprised. I was not supposed to be there. There wasn't supposed to be this much rope. There wasn't supposed to be any blood. And I definitely wasn't supposed to refuse to climb onward to the top, which is what I was doing. My mind was so panicked, I couldn't even think about my own preservation. The rest of the day is kind of a blur. I remember him setting an anchor and tying me off to it and then detaching me from the line, saying he would be back when he caught up to the others who had no idea what was going on. And I remember looking out over the mountains, alone on the rock, after he climbed past me. But my next memory is of being in camp. I don't know how I got down. Our plan was to rappel from the top once we finished, so I suppose that's what happened with them picking me up on the way, but honestly, it's a complete blank. I do remember being back at camp and in my mind, to myself, quitting the sport. I'd lost my nerve, put my friends in danger. The fear had somehow changed me. But then another problem arose. Who was I if I wasn't a rock climbing expat? I didn't want to go back to America. I didn't want to go to college. Rock climbing was my identity, not that I was really anything special, it's just that it was my identity at the time. And I didn't know who I was without it. And the not knowing actually gave me more anxiety than releasing the sport from my life. I knew that was over, I just didn't know how to replace it. And this memory came back to me this week as I listened to some emotional stories about the change you are experiencing. You know, whereas most churches have had to struggle with COVID, you have had to struggle with so much more. The great grind of COVID alone is hard. But your minister of 34 years has retired. Jazz Vespers, Salt Lake institution closed. Vicky was able to move out after 39 months of sanctuary, which is a good thing. But caring for her and the church during this time gave you an identity. And then COVID didn't allow for some sort of cathartic closure. Beloved programs in this community have ended or are being transformed for no other reason other than change is inevitable, which doesn't mean you don't feel grief. I have never liked the term trust the process, because it always sounds like the person who's saying it knows more than the rest of the people. And that isn't the case here anyway. You, Monica, and I are simply trying to find a way into the best future for this congregation and to love each other along the way. And we do it with what we have. We all know the truth in phrases like the past is the past. There's discomfort in the unknown. Things need to pass away for there to be room for new growth. But this is all head knowledge. And the head knowledge does little for the grief that we experience. And in my very first sermon, I said our journey together is about finding out who you are in a post-Tom Goldsmith era. Right? For many of you, he is the only minister you've ever known, at least in a Unitarian Universalist context, and he had a particular way of doing things. But now you get to decide not only who your new minister will be, but who you want to be. What kind of culture this place will have, and who you intend to serve. That's your choice. I have always loved the flipped phrase, don't just do something, sit there. That got a big laugh in the first audience. I know. 9 o'clock is funnier. Also, I tell jokes at 9 o'clock, just so you know. You get the dance party. But don't just do something, sit there. Because when we are feeling anxious, when we're feeling grief, sometimes the way we deal with it is by rushing out, right? Trying to run away from it, trying to get busy. When what we really need to do is just sit with it. You know, Monica and I are creating opportunities to help people get involved and deepen a sense of ownership with the church. But my advice is also to just take some time to listen to what's coming through you so that you can hear who you want to become, who you want to serve. What is this? What are we doing as people trying to love each other? A few years after my incident on the rock in Montenegros, I was serving as a young adult chaperone in a youth con in Bloomington, Indiana, and I got to talking with this young adult leader who was an avid climber. I told him what had happened, and he insisted that we climb together as a form of exorcism. And I refused a handful of times, but I was tired of my climbing career ending on such a note, so finally I said yes. And he carefully planned a climb in the White Mountains of New Hampshire that was rigorous but doable. And it took us all day because I was so slow. I was really scared, honestly. And when we finally got to the summit, we met some old guys who were like in their 40s or something. And they'd finished in just a few hours, but I didn't care. Right? The last climb I ever did was a success. I could leave rock climbing behind on a beautiful note. The ghosts had left me, and there was room for new identity. I never saw that guy again. We were friends on Facebook until he quit the platform like all sane people should. I have no idea where he is now, but I am so grateful that I trusted him, and I said yes to his invitation. It helped me become who I am today, and I'm very happy with that.
Well, I sure am glad to see all of y'all. Good morning. It is my very favorite part of the worship service, the part where we ask you for money. Isn't that your favorite part? Isn't that what you've been waiting for all this time, right? I want to go back to in-person worship and do the offertory. Well, your dreams have come true. If you just reach forward out of your business class seat there and take that QR code, you can snap that with your phone. You can give to support the work of our church, which is entirely funded by the generosity of our members and friends. Now's the time. You can also turn to your neighbor, exchange a quiet elbow bump, and welcome everyone to service. Thank you to everyone who danced, to everyone who elbow bumped and said hello, to everyone who tried out that goofy QR code to give. Thank you to our door greeters this morning, our cantors, Jan and Paul Gandy. We sure appreciate you. And thank you to Michele for covering while David Owens is away from our church. Thank you, thank you. It takes a whole village, don't it? And thank you in advance to all of you who are helping out with our trunk or treat event after this service. Thanks to those of you who showed up in costume. That's amazing. One of the best things about a church community is that it really gives us a chance to practice what community means by taking care of everyone's kids, not just the ones we're legally required to look after. I love all your kids and grandkids, and I want them to have the happiest Halloween ever and eat every ounce of sugar that's given to them. Now, in my household, we're in that liminal space where the young human is still trick-or-treating more out of a sense of irony and innocent gluttony, but also observing the season in more age-appropriate ways. Haunted houses are now psychologically manageable, and she loves to watch scary movies. All kinds of scary movies. Ghost stories, teen slashers, psychological thrillers. The scarier, the better. Now, as much as I love to watch movies with her, I really can't hang for the bloody ones. Horror movies have come a long way since I cowered under the covers watching A Nightmare on Elm Street. But I loved scary movies when I was her age, too. I don't know, maybe it's a teenager thing, or maybe we all have a little bit of scared teenager inside us. Why do people enjoy scary movies when life itself is scary enough? Is it the thrill of the adrenaline rush? Some experts believe that we gravitate towards scary movies for date night because the body's fear response is similar to sexual arousal. And so it feels nice to jump into the arms of a sweetheart when the cinematic monster jumps out of the shadows. Others believe that we experience a catharsis from experiencing the anxiety of a fictional terror and the matching relief when the movie is finally over. But I also think it's possible that every culture needs spaces to safely practice greeting death before it inevitably arrives for us. We need to rehearse the emotions associated with death: anxiety, terror, grief. We turn out the lights and put our limbic systems to the test. How much fear and death can we handle? Then the lights come on and we feel that wave of relief. We laugh and tease each other. You were so scared, weren't you? And then we go home and try to sleep, with or without one last check under the bed, just to make absolutely sure we're really alone. Horror filmmaker Stephen Scheil says, horror movies have two main concerns: why people hurt one another and what happens when we die. The world is a violent and scary place, and death is everywhere. We're reminded every day of the brutality that people can commit as individuals, as cells, as armies, as governments. Horror asks questions about the brutality, where it comes from, where it leads. It shows us images that describe that brutality, often graphic, often repulsive, but it allows us to confront it in a space where we can imaginatively and emotionally deal with it. There's enough to be afraid of in this world. You'd think the last thing we need is fake fears. Yet fake fear has itself become a source of fear. As misinformation, especially about vaccine safety, already rampant in online circles, threatened repeatedly to derail efforts to end the COVID-19 pandemic. Sometimes the fear of the vaccine had roots in reality. It's not unreasonable for people with no medical training to ask how the vaccines could have been developed so quickly. There is wisdom in taking one's time to get all the facts before making a decision. And God knows none of us really knew what we were doing at any time during this pandemic. But other fears seem more centered in conspiracy theories. Yes, there are people who believe that the vaccines can change their DNA, or that they insert trackable microchips into the body, or that they cause any number of diseases. And there were many people, still are, who simply deny that COVID-19 even exists or that it's any worse than a bad cold. Sometimes I would see these people using a slogan that disturbed me: faith over fear. Maybe that slogan disturbs you as well. I've seen it used to justify COVID denial via an argument that goes something like this: God is in control of things, and if God has determined that it's my time to die, then it's my time. But to take precautions such as staying home, wearing a mask when I go out, or getting vaccinated would demonstrate that I'm letting fear control my life rather than God. Let me be clear. I'm not interested in ridiculing these beliefs. First of all, it doesn't get us anywhere. Ridiculing beliefs that we think irrational only entrenches the believer deeper in those beliefs. But more importantly, allowing ourselves to feel smug and superior to people who make this faith over fear argument ignores the fact that all of us are vulnerable to misinformation and propaganda. It also ignores the fact that faith over fear is actually how all of us live our lives every day. Don't believe me? Here's an example. Those of you who came to church in a car today, did you personally inspect the vehicle before you got into it to make sure it was safe? My guess is that most of you did not. You just got in and turned the key. I'll bet most of you didn't even check to make sure there was gas in the tank. And even on the off chance that you did inspect your vehicle, you couldn't possibly have expected all the other vehicles that are on the road. So how did you know that it was safe to drive? When I drive, I usually rely on what the car did yesterday. It was working fine yesterday. I didn't notice anything that felt off. Felt safe yesterday. It's probably safe today. In other words, I have faith that the car is safe, and I have faith that most of the other drivers on the road are similarly convinced of their own safety. I even allow myself the luxury, most days, of having faith that other drivers are sober and not looking at their phones while driving, a supposition for which I have considerably less evidence. Were I not inclined to have faith in my vehicle or in other drivers on the road, I would be too terrified to drive. And a lot of people are too terrified to drive. They don't drive at all. People die driving their cars, and they're more likely to die close to home when driving feels more routine and we're paying less attention. Yet I've made a choice to put faith over fear. I choose to have faith that you're driving safely and that therefore it's safe for me to drive too. That's not a rational decision. It's an emotional one. Getting behind the wheel every day is rarely based on data, virtually always based on how safe I feel. Still not convinced? How many of you have taught your teenager how to drive? How much harder is it to toss the keys to that 16-year-old with the underdeveloped frontal lobe? You know she got an A in driver ed, and she did a great job driving you to the grocery store. Of course, we all know the statistics about teen drivers, and our insurance companies sure know the statistics. But your top line in the moment decision has less to do with the actuarial chart and more to do with your heart racing as you watch her walk out the door. When most of us think about the word faith, we tend to define it as a set of irrational beliefs, a belief perhaps in something supernatural that lacks evidence or proof. We think of faith as trusting so-called knowledge that is based on no evidence, but actually that's not faith, that's superstition. Faith and superstition are not the same thing. I'm going to propose a better definition of faith, one that's more aligned with our lived experience of it. Faith is the process of trusting knowledge that is based in emotional evidence. Faith is the process of trusting knowledge that is based in emotional evidence. Now, if that definition makes you feel a little uncomfortable, it might be because we have been acculturated not to trust emotional evidence. Since the Enlightenment, people in Western society have been taught in both secular and religious contexts that emotions are unreliable sources of information. But science is now able to demonstrate that human cognition is mostly emotional, with surprisingly little cognitive processing available for what we would call rational thinking. Or, as researcher and best-selling author Brené Brown says, we are not thinking beings who sometimes feel. We are feeling beings who sometimes think. Human beings, it turns out, are not robots who take in information and put out logical conclusions. No matter how much we understand and trust science, and we should, we make virtually every real-world decision based on how we feel. What do you want for supper tonight? What sounds good? Want to stay in and watch a movie or go out? I might be coming down with something. Should I see a doctor or just tough it out? Was that girl flirting with me? Or was she just looking at someone else across the room? We might think to ourselves that we bring more rational behavior to bigger decisions than what we are having for dinner, but it's not true. The bigger the decision, the more likely our minds are to be clouded by emotion. One need look no farther than the dressing room where a bride is getting prepared for her wedding? Or a hospital room where a difficult diagnosis has just been delivered? Or a mediation room where a divorcing couple is dividing their belongings and custody rights? To know that we are feeling beings who occasionally think, and not often enough at that. What if, instead of pretending that we don't have any of these irrational and unreliable emotions, we instead learned how to listen to them and take them seriously? If people weren't meant to have emotions, we wouldn't have evolved them. Fear serves a purpose. So does grief. Faith doesn't toss these emotions out the window in search of real evidence. Real faith understands emotions as evidence and uses that evidence to make decisions that are based in connection. We are limited beings who, no matter how smart or educated we are, can only know so much. And our society is so disconnected, trust in expertise so eroded, corruption so common, access to services so restricted, that it's no surprise that some people don't trust doctors and scientists. When it comes to vaccines, there's plenty of empirical evidence to support their safety and effectiveness, but unless you're a scientist and you know where to access the studies and understand how to read them, you're still in a position of trusting the scientists who wrote them. The question is, does the emotional evidence available to you support that trust? At some point, faith is the only thing that gets us through life. Faith is a subset of trust in which we often have conflicting evidence, but we choose to trust anyway. We choose to have faith that other people are doing the best they can with what they have to work with, even when they don't show up as their best selves. When we are sick or dying, we put our trust in our caregivers. We are faithful to our spouses, choosing to be married over and over again, even as everything in our relationship changes, including us. We choose to put our faith in our kids, even when they make unwise decisions. We choose to put faith in our democracy, even when the headlines scream that democracy is dying. Some of us choose to put our faith in God, even when we don't know what God is or even if God is, because we have emotional evidence of a sacred dimension of life that is greater than our capacity to understand it. We choose to live, as Albert Einstein is supposed to have said, as if everything is a miracle. But know that all of us, no matter what our spiritual beliefs, put our faith in something. Faith, our ability to trust based on emotional evidence, connects the dots of our lives, allows us to move forward without cowering in fear as if life were a scary movie. True faith, not superstition, is an acknowledgement that our feelings are valid and that they have something important to tell us about living in an interconnected web of life. Real faith, rather than pushing away fear, embraces fear with gratitude, thanking it for the message that it has for us, and chooses courage based on the evidence that we are at all times surrounded by love and support in every direction. So I challenge you this week to think about the things and the people in which you place your faith, the things for which you have incontrovertible emotional evidence. Do you believe in the goodness of people? That most of the time people really are trying their best? Do you believe that love matters and that grief is evidence of how much it matters? Do you believe in the goodness of the world around you, in spite of all the suffering that you can see? Where do you choose to place your faith?
Unitarian Universalists have always been iconoclasts, smashing the traditional definitions that we inherited from religions of days past and writing new ways and new traditions into being. Honoring our ancestors while dreaming past their limitations is very much the spirit of Samhain, Halloween, Day of the Dead, All Souls Day. So as you observe the turning of the year and the thinning of the veil today, may you feel connected to your ancestors and beholden to your descendants. So lovely. Thank you, Michele. And thank all of you for being here today. I also just want to say hello to those of us joining online. We really appreciate you being with us. Please come through and pick up your auction tickets and raffle tickets if you haven't had a chance yet. Otherwise, we'd love to see you out on the patio for chatting.